we go other places, and it seems so incredibly obvious to people that that's not the case. And yet we absolutely think, women should be allowed to drive a car, wear pants if they want to, not wear anything if they want to. You see what happened in Tunis? And the 5 or 6 young ladies all protested, etc. And the etc. was the part that I noticed on TV. That's incredibly obvious to us that ought to be the case. Where does that incredibly obvious come from? Our cultural history, which it's like the fish swimming in the water. The line, the fish don't know the water's there because they're swimming in it, right? It's invisible to them. Our cultural norms, our cultural moral beliefs are so deeply embedded in the way we think that we can't step out from those and look at them and say, aha, that's a model. You're confusing that model with the way life or reality is. But there are other models out there, right? How do you judge which model is absolutely the right one? That's a serious problem. It does seem like you can't avoid it. You have to make your choices. But I think it's really important for us when we're talking about logic, and we want to say that logic is absolutely the very beginning of order. And what sort of laws of logic are absolutely beginnings of that? And we say things like the law of excluded middle, the law of identity, the law of non-contradiction. We trace these back to Aristotle, who's the first one that codified these. Now, he probably got it because he was a reader, read. He was, in fact, made fun of by Plato as being the bookworm. He's always got his head in a book, right? But Aristotle gives us this definition of the law, well, the law of identity. And these, you could just go, you don't need a text for them, you could just look up law of identity. Wikipedia even has it for us. These 3 classical laws of thought, or the root axioms, if you will, of logic, is that a thing is what it is and not another thing. A thing is what it is and not another thing. By the way, the screen shakes because the people upstairs walk and that shakes the projector. Sorry. It doesn't mean that you're on drugs or anything. So A is A, and not A. Essentially. That's lots of different ways of formulating it. So Jackson, you're Jackson. And if I didn't think so, I'd be really confused. Aristotle says you couldn't actually argue with someone who didn't accept the law of identity because they're not being consistent enough to agree with themselves. They disagree with themselves from moment to moment, right? His favorite target in this was a philosopher named Heraclitus. By the way, the Greek words mean something. Hera is hour, where we get hours from, or time, right? And Clitus is the glory of time. So Heraclitus, his central issue was the nature of time. Everything flows, ponte re. It's all like the river. You can't step into the same river twice because it's not exactly the same river the second time. Right? Something's changed about it. Right? So a thing isn't what it is. It doesn't persist all the time. The odd thing about that today is our contemporary physicists actually agree with it completely. That everything is energy in an arrangement, right? And constantly changing. So you really aren't Jackson, except by convention. Because you are not the same person you were when you came in here, or even from moment to moment. kinds of biological things are changing, so you're not exactly the same thing. And yet we have a consensus, a linguistic structure that imposes you on yourself. And by the way, that's actually unique to Western European tradition. There are other cultures, apparently, very difficult for me to understand because I was raised in the Western tradition, so I translate everything into this. And when people say, oh, there are other cultures out there that don't have the law of identity, I think, weird. How can they live? I am so structured by the way Western thought has ordered my mind. It's like trying to load a Macintosh program onto my IBM computer. The plug doesn't even fit in, right? What's a Macintosh? Do they still have those? Sorry. It's outdated. I used to have an Atom. Did you ever hear of those? Old tape drive? 64K. More than anybody will need. Okay. Logic, on the one hand, then, seems to be the way the universe is structured. I can't really understand how a language could work unless you're accepting the law of identity. A thing is what it is, not another thing. These classical causal thought. Excluded middle. You can see that it's essentially the same idea, except the way it's expressed. Because now you say that either you are Jackson or you're not Jackson. You're either Jackson or you're not Jackson. This is either Jackson or it's not Jackson. That's always true. See how that works? That compound phrase that says it's either A or it's not A, it's true for any situation, for anything you pick. So of course that means it has absolutely nothing to do with reality in any particular case. It's instead something about the nature of logic, the logic of our language, the language of our thought. And it is inherent in Western European languages. I don't understand how it can't be in Chinese. But there are all kinds of interesting books that try to explain that Chinese doesn't structure logic the same way we do. We don't have objects necessarily the way we do. And so on. Chinese apparently does not have the verb to be. Which really doesn't seem to make sense to me.
Russian doesn't really have conjugations for to be either, does it?
It does. It does. It does actually. They don't often use it in like the sentence structure.
Well, if you say
It's
I
assumed.
student. Right.
But they have to be in lots of all the tenses. The problem with Chinese, apparently, is when we get into the syllogistic logic, where I'll have four basic statement types, what we call A, E, I, and O statements. You have all of the subject are members of the subject, of the predicate set. None of the subject set are members of the predicate set. Some of the subject set are members of the predicate set, and some of the subject set are not members of the predicate set. The four types of statements that can be true or false in Western European languages. You can't structure those in Chinese because they don't have the is to connect the two sets. From what I understand. I don't speak Chinese, so I don't understand how that could be. Apparently, that seems to be the case. So, the very logic associated with Western European languages that we think of as universal, cannot think without these laws of thought, seem to be absent from other completely developed, complex thinking systems in the world. So that's a real interesting